Well, you are joining me, Amy Elizabeth, once again as I chat with Cami Turpin of Blue Hill Images about an Instagram loop we are in called Be in My Bonnet. Last time we talked about the prompt that we had, Green with Envy. And this week, the prompt was a Helen Keller quote, and I pulled it up so I wouldn't forget it. The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart. And yes, we did post this last week, but we couldn't chat about it because I ended up with COVID and no voice. That was my biggest COVID symptom, fortunately, but no voice. And so Cami was gracious enough to reschedule when my voice was, I don't know, I'm probably like, it's hard to judge your own voice because it always like feels worse.
Right. You sound regular.
Okay. I feel like I'm like 70%. So
yeah.
Well, so Cami, let's talk about this quote that I think we were both really excited. I mean, is there a prompt we haven't been excited about? No, but
I know some of them are really tricky. This one, I just really love Helen Keller. But the funny thing about this quote is because anything kind of goes, right? Because it's just the best and most beautiful things in the world. It's sometimes the wider themes are much more difficult to narrow down, I would say, than the ones that are really specific, So even though I was excited, I was like, but what in the world do I even do? So it was tricky. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I felt like it was like, oh, I know the best and most beautiful things. Like I felt like right away I could identify kind of what I thought they were, but then it was how do I represent that?
Right.
And that's where I had to start kind of thinking out of the box. So for me, it was the best and most beautiful things in the world are, I think I went more like feelings and experiences of things like love, freedom, joy, peace, even friendship. Like you can touch a friend, but friendship, you can't, it's not tangible. It's like only the people in the relationship really understand it. And so how do you represent the intangible in a tangible way? And that's the challenge, but that's also what makes it fun.
Exactly. So what was your process this time? Like, how did you decide on the technique that you chose?
Yeah. So I ended up, for whatever reason, I got birds in my head for, I think they, clearly symbolize, kind of freedom. And it just, I felt like all of these things could be symbolized by a kind of bird. It could boil down to birds. And so I had this idea of having birds in my shot. Everything I do is film and it's in camera. So I wasn't going to take it into Photoshop and do composites, more because I don't know how to do those things. I think they're beautiful. It is not my forte. So I'm not like some film elitist by any stretch of the imagination. It's the one thing I get. So with Shoot It With Film Insiders, which is a monthly membership group that we're in, the monthly module was all about specialty film, DIY specialty film. And it hit me, why don't I make my own bird specialty film?
Very
cool. I found an image of birds and I inverted it because, the sky was white and the birds were black. So I inverted it to make the sky black and the birds white.
Because that works better for doubles, right?
I wanted to be able to do a double exposure, and I could have done it the other way, but yes. I also didn't know if my frames would align. And so I wanted the sky to just not add any light. And
right. But also, I think then the birds would have been black. And didn't you want them to be white? Like
I wanted them to be white because
right.
I knew I was going to I had in my head, I was going to use a black backdrop. And so I wanted everything that was a subject to, like, the backdrops to be black so that there's no light. And then the subjects to all have kind of the light hitting them. I mean, I could have done it the other way around, but
this way, I think because black works so well with double exposures, then you each got to carry equal weight. The birds and you were equal in the shot, which is, I think, really, really great idea.
Yeah.
And also just birds being white feels symbolic.
Also. Yeah, I did. I wanted the birds. Yes. And that was part of it too, is kind of like this black backdrop. And so the brightest thing on the frame is me and the birds, which represent. So yes, these are kind of the things that have light hitting them. And that to me felt, symbolic of them being the things reflecting, the brightest things in the frame. So I took this image and I put it on my iPad and I put my macro lens on and I just shot a whole roll. I kind of switched it up. I would even do some doubles. So I would have birds like in this corner of the frame and then do a double exposure. So they ended up being triples and birds in this corner. And then the very last, so I was winding and then I got this idea, wait, what if I do slow shutter and I drag my camera so the birds look like they're moving? And I did it. And I was like, that is the best idea I've ever had. And I wound my camera and lo and behold, that was the very last frame.
Of course, it was the very last one.
And that happens so often when I'm doing anything. I finally get into a groove and I'm like, it's like, I'll be shooting and I'll be like, isn't this roll done? And then I'll get to the last frame and I'm like, oh, all this new inspiration kicks in. And I'm like, crap, that was the last.
Now I want to do a whole new roll. That happens to me a lot too. When you're going, I'm just bored. Now I'm just going to start wasting frames because at this point I'm just bored of it. And then then all of a sudden you say like, no, wait, now I finally got there. Isn't that interesting though? Because I don't know what I'm trying to say. It emphasizes the importance of like practice or just doing something, like continuing to sketch images, I guess, or rough drafts. That the more we do something and the more we stretch ourselves, these new ideas kind of pop in, I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've been like, by the very end, I've said, oh, now I'm finally getting in the groove. And it's interesting also because I don't feel like if we had 50 frames in a roll that it would probably still take us till 50th frame. You know what I mean? It kind of has to be that you're at the end, that you have this kind of limit. And so you're just thinking, what can I do for this very last thing? So I don't know. I think it's interesting that it was the last frame. Yeah. And more than just like, of course, but I think it's probably because it was the last frame.
And I actually encounter that a lot when I'm like, if I'm doing self-portraits and I want to just shoot a whole roll, I'll be like kind of bored and going through them. And then the last frame, something will strike me. And so there is something magical about that, about having that last. And I think that is something that as film shooters, we find as an advantage because we can't just shoot endlessly. We do have a last. And for whatever reason, that psychological barrier, it pushes you at the end. And I've experienced this in other areas of life too, of like kind of things, working through things to a point where you're like, I'm not getting anywhere, but still doing it. And then all of a sudden, bam, it hits you. And if you would have quit when you were feeling bored and like nothing was happening, you wouldn't have gotten to that point of here's the breakthrough. And so I think that is kind of a word of encouragement to people who feel like they're in lulls and they're pushing through, that just wait, because your brain is working and the magic will come.
Right. It's a lot about patience and allowing yourself to be in the process. I've been talking with people a lot about that lately. It's just like, stop being scared of being in the middle, because we have to be in the middle in order to get to the end. Right. But also we're always perpetually in the middle because there's no such thing as an end. So anyway, but there is an end of the roll.
There are breakthrough moments though. So, those we can think of as the end and then the beginning.
Yep.
Yeah. Because then you're on to the next adventure. You're like, all right, I did that. Now I need to move on. But
exactly. But it's a stepping stone.
Exactly. Yes.
So, limits within the process is the good. Anyway, so that's how you got to the the birds that are actually moving.
Yeah. So I only have one of those, and I ended up using it in my final product. So I extracted the film and I loaded it into my Nikon F100. So I started out with my FE, and then I loaded it into my Nikon F100 because that's the camera that I can hook a remote to, which is just easiest for self-portraits. And once again, I used my strobe, but I only used the model light, and I did long exposures of 1.3 seconds, which I had done for Green with Envy. Okay. And I just shot through it, not even remembering, I didn't keep track of what I was shooting. I didn't even know if the frames were going to align or if I'd have birds cut off in the middle or whatever. And I
Oh,
actually,
I do have a question about that. Like, did you purposely, when you were shooting the birds, say, I'm going to put these in the corner here, or I'm going to fill the frame? Did you do a variety, or did you specifically try to kind of place them in the
I
top?
tried to place them toward the top and bottom because I
Mm.
figured, okay, no matter what, I'm going to be somewhere in the middle. I didn't vary it that much. I think I was trying to place them in the corners around my head, but without really thinking, oh, but when I load this again, who knows where the birds could have all ended up in my face. So I did do a lot where they were top and bottom, some where they were kind of in the middle. Um, and the frames must have lined up pretty decently because they ended
Because they're in the corners.
in the corners. They're not like, and they're around me.
Mhm.
I don't know. Film knows. It just,
Magical.
yeah. And two different cameras, like I couldn't have even lined it up if I tried. So I figure at least I'll just let it go. So yeah, I didn't take notes on what the shots looked like. I just shot through the first time, shot through the second time, and I'm like, whatever I get, I get. And I ended up, obviously the one where the birds were in motion were my favorite. And I'm like, why didn't I do more of this? But there were quite a few shots that I felt just represented it. And then I showed them to you, and it was you who had the genius idea of this triptych. And once you said that, because I was like, there are kind of multiple, like there's a story here. Like I saw the story. I mean,
Right. I think you were kind of saying to me, like, this one, I like this part about it, but this one doesn't quite do this. And I was just like, well, they work together.
they do.
So they're
Yeah,
just a story,
it totally was. And so I did do a triptych, and the first shot you can see is the one where the birds are flying. And the thing with the triptych is it works so well for the story that I wanted to tell. So you can see me closed off, and that was intentional. I did some of these closed off. I did some of these where I was reaching up as if like waiting to be kind of dragged up and, up with the birds. I did some where I was like flying, like I tried to vary it because what I wanted to say was so multifaceted. Um, and so it did really work to incorporate kind of some of these facets into the same post. So the first one I'm closed off and the birds are flying overhead. So it wasn't a flash, it was still a long exposure. So there is some blur, but I actually kind of like that because you can tell that we're both existing in time. Like I am not frozen and the birds are flying, and yet I'm barely moving and they're totally moving and I'm closed off.
Mm.
And then the second one, you just see the little wing tip of the bird at the very top, and I'm reaching up. So once again, didn't plan that, but here the birds, you can tell they're flying overhead, but all you see is just a little wing.
Little
And
tips. And then the tip of your fingers are out. I just really think that's like the most magical one. Just like this perfect little boop.
so it's like I'm reaching up, but I'm looking down on purpose. And the point is like kind of a reaching up, like whoever will help drag me into this, into that freedom and love and joy, like I'll take it. But I'm still like,
The hesitation.
yeah, there's a hesitation there because it is scary to reach up into the unknown.
Mm.
And then the last one, the birds are totally still, obviously, and I'm the whirlwind now. So I am up with them. And yet I am, if you take that snapshot, now the birds look still in comparison to me. Because I have found that freedom and love and joy. And so,
Well, and in that one, the birds are all surrounding you. It's like you're with them. I mean, it's just the most incredible thing.
and the first
Just,
one, the birds are all above and they're
and,
tiny. So you can tell they're just like far.
yeah.
And then you see like the wingtip is like a little bigger. And then they're all around me and it's the biggest that they were. And that would have been that would have been at least a triple, because I know I took in the original bird image, I think there's 4 birds. In that image, there's way more. So yeah, it was just like, that's the story.
Yeah.
That's the story. And, I don't work in Photoshop. And so I could have composited, but I can't. And so it's like, you just kind of have to let film know. And it did.
That's the magic of it. Well, and it's part of the story because it's the letting go.
Yes.
And so if you had controlled this perfectly, it wouldn't have been the same story. It's the letting go and the trust. There's so much about trust in this one. I think that there had to be trust in it, in the process.
Risk and risk and trusting the process.
Then
And
tell us how you got to the overlay.
oh, okay. That was purely, so Cami was like, oh, but you could do a triptych. And then she put it on Marco Polo. But when and I was like, oh, I want to save it. And then I noticed when I saved it, that Marco Polo automatically put this, because I was like, they look so small. Like I was like, I can do the triptych, and then I'm going to post each one individually.
But then it would be the wrong thing because it's this way, and then the other ones are this. It's always poses a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I would have just made it really small. I would have done it in a vertical frame.
Yes.
We would have had so much negative space. And when I saw the image behind, I was like, I'm going to put an image behind. And so the image I actually ended up putting behind isn't any of those three. Mm-hmm. It's a different one that
and you get to use another one.
I got to use another one. Yeah.
So great. And it's all blurry and so pretty. I love it. I love that. And the way that you, I love the way that you put your thoughts and your process in there in a beautiful way. Cause I'm always just like on stories going, and then I did this, and then I did this. And yours was like in the post permanently. I just really liked that because it really is, the process is so much a part of the story that it really needs to be in there. So I might copy you about that.
I copied somebody else, to tell you the truth. I copied, if you follow Scott the painter, he is a really talented artist. And he has been doing these amazing, so if you're familiar with Stations of the Cross, which might, if, on a Good Friday service, you might walk through the Stations of the Cross. Well, he did a Stations of the Resurrection for Easter. And he's posted this series of Stations of the Resurrection. And in it, he will post the words to go with it in the text body, in the caption, but also in the carousel. And I love it because it's more palatable, because it breaks up the text chunks and it makes the words bigger, and you're just kind of like naturally scrolling. And it makes me like, I want to read through it more than I would just a huge like caption. That's just,
and a lot of people ignore captions too.
Yeah. Well, because it can feel daunting. There's tiny words. It's all scrunched.
Right. And especially in a loop, because you have this much text already. Right. Just to have the loop. I mean, every single time I'm always like, wait, do I put this first? Do I put this first? Where do I put everything so that people are seeing the most important thing, but they have to see the loop text. Yeah. So this was a good solution. I really liked it.
So feel free to copy Scott the painter too, because that's all I did.
He's not the only one, but
I was like, that's it. I want to put because every time I want to do my thoughts and my process, and that way it lives there. And I think it's more palatable. So yeah, it was just, this loop is so fun.
It is. It's fun. Well, and okay, so I've been talking to people about my process lately, and like how I said, sometimes I write a whole thing, and someone just asked me, is it okay if I do the formula backwards? Like, what if I just have a fully formed idea, or I know what I want it to look like, but I don't know what that means yet? And I'm like, yeah, all of it's fair game. There's no rules really in creativity. And so you can jump into the formula that I laid out for them, but you can jump into it at any point. It doesn't work in a linear way. Our brains do not work in a linear way. Even that, like, you got the roll back. And I feel like this is going to happen every single time. I say you got it back, but you developed it.
Right.
You're looking at the roll, and always the first thing is, I don't know how none of this works. None of this works. None of this works. And it happens every single time. Not just to you, to me too. Like, yeah. We look at the things and say, well, that didn't turn out how I thought, so none of it works. And then by the end, we're like, it's the best thing ever. Because part of the process is also the culling. And again, I think in different arts, we're much more apt to do that. That we expect photography to be the perfect thing the first time, but there's a lot to it, especially if you're doing anything mixed media, if you're doing anything that's like, well, I took a whole roll of this for one image. So how do you get to the one image? You know what I mean? Again, part of the process. It's all part of anyway, I just did want to mention that it's not It's not like you did it and you were like, ta-da! You had to go through a whole thing.
Yeah, you
So,
have to process it again.
yeah.
And I know we've talked a lot about this too, about like imbuing meaning onto an image afterwards,
Yes.
and just how we don't have any problem with that because our images, the meaning will change for us over time too. And so often when I do an Instagram post, I think about what I'm feeling that morning. Like you guys, I just like this, and I go and I'm like, there is an image that encapsulates that. And then I like look at it and I look at the meaning that I could have never even possibly known to intend then. I was just expressing emotions in it, however. And then you come back and you're like, oh, what I'm feeling now, I feel in that image.
Right.
And that's art. Like,
Well, and even like today, today I posted a picture that I took during my daughter's little sugar shoot.
oh, I love that.
And I didn't post yesterday at all because I kept looking at that shot. It's what I had scheduled and is what I had planned to post that day. And I couldn't post it. It just didn't feel right. But I was like, all right, I really do need to post something just because I wanted to get to the next images. You know what I mean? Anyway,
I don't plan anything, but I could imagine.
Well, I just was like, yeah, I really did want that photo there
Yeah.
in the grid for some dumb reason that I won't try to explain. But so I was like, I'm going to post it, but I can't just ever just post something and just be like, here's a picture. Yeah. So I was lying in my bed last night thinking for a long time and thought, no, I get why this image feels okay to post today. And then there was a meaning. It's not even like I said, this is how I'm feeling. Oh, this image will work. It was like, I looked at that image and I said, what does this mean to me today? And it really, like, now I really can't see it any other way. And actually in the scope of that project, which, you know, is personal to both of us. Yeah. I mean, personal to me as in my friendship with you, but, you know, I never really felt like that image fit in. And then today, this morning at midnight, it made sense for the first time. So that was also kind of interesting because I didn't plan to post it today and then figure out that thing, but it just like the art will work where you need it to work. Yeah. It's kind of like how people open the scriptures and they say, oh, and I opened right to this scripture. It's not that you opened right to that scripture. It's that you found what you needed in the scripture and you can do it. There's a, the book, oh no, it's Wilkie Collins, but I can't remember which one it is. Anyway, someone reads Robinson Crusoe like it's the Bible. And so somebody always comes up and says, did Robinson Crusoe come and tell you I was going to come here today? And he's like, it did. And then he reads the passage. So we can find it in anything. I always like to use that as an example because it's just so, I don't know, like we will find in art what we need to find in art, I guess.
Yeah. I love that. All right, Cami, I share your process. We're here for it.
My word, I almost forgot what image it was because I'm so stuck in the next one. But okay, so this is kind of funny because this is another one of those things where you get an idea. A lot of people say, where do you get all your ideas and where do you store them or whatever? Because you obviously can't get to every idea you think of right away, right? And I never want to lose them. So I'm always like, you know, writing them down in here or whatever. But I don't think I wrote this one down anywhere except in my morning pages, which is just, you know, writing brain dump kind of stuff in the morning. But I had this idea one time. I was thinking of Beethoven and how he went deaf and continued to compose. And I thought, you know, what would happen? Because my eyes were kind of starting to go. I mean, I feel sometimes like my sight is not where it used to be. So I thought to myself, what would happen as a photographer if I suddenly couldn't see? Would I give up photography? Like, sounds like such an obviously, if you can't do it, then you have to give it up. But Beethoven didn't. So I just thought, like, how much of my process is really dependent on sight? Because how much am I telling people that, you know, you shoot from the heart? And so I already had this idea about wanting to do a project or a role or something where I shot with my eyes closed. So when this theme came up, I thought, okay, this is my chance because, and I wasn't even thinking about Helen Keller being actually blind, but she's also deaf too. And so I I didn't, I did use my sense of hearing. I did not make myself completely blind and deaf, but I did decide to just put my camera on, I set it to the Sunny 16 roll. So I had 100 ISO film in my camera. I set my shutter speed to 100. I set my aperture to 16. And so I knew that would be a perfect exposure. And then I know how to work my camera basically without using my eyes. So I knew that I could change anything I wanted to whatever shutter speed I wanted, as long as I'm just counting clicks and just counting stops, which is easier than you think if you if you're scared of doing that. But I think one time halfway through, I opened my eyes and made sure I was still where I thought I was. I cheated a little. But the rest of the time, I just went out and I would position myself in a place where, it was the blossoms. It was, so this is another thing. The idea behind my shot, I guess I should start there, is that was the technique I wanted to use, is shooting blind. But the idea that I wanted was to have the best and most beautiful things. That was what I was trying to think of. And to me, it's like those in-between moments when we're not stressed out about anything and we're not working toward anything and we're not, it's those moments of rest. One of the projects I'm doing this year is about music, and for the big, it's actually called the silence between, because there's a quote that says music is not in the notes, but in the silence between. And so that's kind of how I feel about the best and most beautiful moments in life, are those, the moments between. So it all just kind of fit together, that I thought, here's a moment. I don't have any time for this, but I'm going to go outside and I'm going to make myself take a moment. I'm going to look at the beautiful blossoms that are outside. I'm going to feel the sunshine. It was this one warm day in the middle of all of this rain. I'm going to let Nora come out and just like play around like she does, because that's another thing that I really love, is just like spending time without having to tell her what to do or any of those kinds of things. And so I just took that minute and I just listened and I felt, and I tried different things that I shot like I normally would shoot. I pointed at the things I would normally point at. I did slow shutter when I thought I would normally do that. And I just never used my eyes. I just did everything from the heart. And it's hilarious to me that when I got that roll back, it looked exactly like every other shot, every other roll I've ever taken. There was nothing necessarily special about it.
I was kind of mad at how perfect it looks. I'm like, you were like, oh, my scan tech's gonna be like, what the heck did she send? Well, at least he knows I send weird stuff all the time. And I see it and I'm like, that's the most normal roll.
Just more regular than usual. It really was. It was almost like letting go of all of my, the technical expectations or whatever, or just like following my instinct was like, this is the real thing you want to shoot. It took away kind of all expectations, which allowed me to create literally from the heart. Yeah. And, Nora is not necessarily, when I shot towards her, she's not necessarily framed correctly. She's never in focus because, well, no, she is. This is the thing that blew my mind. I really love taking pictures of my daughters, like, dropping petals on me. So I had her do that. When I take those shots, I have the most difficult time focusing on their hands. They always move them at the last second or they whatever. And this is the only time I have ever been able to get her hands, both shots that I took of that, her hands are in focus. I don't know what happened. I think I said to somebody, it's like Luke taking in Star Wars, taking off the visor and being like, use the force. So apparently I should just stop focusing on things and then things will be in focus. I don't know, but it was amazing to me. How normal the role was, but also really felt like me.
Yeah, it did.
So I was pleased with it. I was happy with it, but I didn't know how to present it because I wanted to present the whole role. I actually did make a reel this morning I'm going to post, but I didn't want to post a reel. I wanted there to be an image and I wanted it to feel like shooting the role felt, which didn't necessarily happen in each individual image. So I decided to, at the last second that morning, print a bunch of them on my Polaroid lab to make transparencies out of them, which is difficult for color. You have to use a blow dryer and stuff, and then stack them on my light table kind of haphazardly, but kind of not, so that it just kind of felt like the moment. And if you look at it, it's funny because I did put a out of focus picture of Nora in there and then put some other stuff on top of it. And then I have one of her, you know, dropping the petals. And look at me right now. Do you see this?
Yeah.
As I'm reaching towards you, the hands. So she's like that. She's back there. So it looks like 3D.
It looks 3D. I was going to say, it looks 3D. Oh, when I ran, because I didn't see that final result
because I made it 30 seconds before we posted.
No, I know. I wasn't going to throw you under the bus like that, but
I totally did.
Fine. I was like, Cami flipping Turpin. This looks 3D. It looks like her hands are coming out of the screen at me, and I gasped.
But I didn't even notice that until after I posted it. And I'm like, oh, hey, it kind of looks like.
It was immediate.
And it was kind of funny because as, you know, I usually keep my little, what do you call it? My transparencies in the frame, but a couple of them, I just felt like I wanted them to layer even, you know, more. I wanted it to be sort of overlapping underneath. And oh, I didn't even mention that I did take this into Photoshop. I took them all into Photoshop the night before and spent probably an hour and a half or 2 hours, just like overlapping them and making them different transparencies and like blurring the lines. And I did a whole bunch of stuff and it did not look right. I could not get that like feeling. And part of it is, I think I was just kind of using my eyes too much because, right, the process was to use your heart and not your eyes. So then when I just started printing out the transparencies, some of them I thought, yeah, let's get rid of the frame here. Let's kind of overlap these. Let's just put them straight onto the counter or onto the light table, and just kind of started layering them how it felt right. And I did try a couple different ways, but for real, I was in such a hurry that I had to purely work on instinct. And just say, hope this works. And afterwards, I did kind of just like move one over a little bit and said, oh, that looks a little bit better. But at the same time, then maybe it would have been a little too perfect. You know, not that it was in any stretch of the imagination perfect. Holy cow. And I think a lot of people, if you don't stop and look at it, and then it just looks like a big mess. And there's a lot of yellow in it. Like there's a lot of kind of light. And that could have been the lab and the way it printed, or it could have just been them layering together. But in the original pictures, there's no yellow.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was like because of the transparency or.
Yeah, I think so. And I also, part of it, part of it is that I did edit it like afterwards. I did it in Lightroom Mobile. Because I wanted to see the front of it still had some color. Everybody, the front of it had some color, and I wanted to see that color because in life you can see it, but when I took the picture of it, you couldn't really see it. Just looked black along the top. So the little pieces that didn't turn transparent, I wanted to be able to see those. So I think in editing a little bit, some of the yellow came out too. But I even toned it down. Like it was, it could have been the light, who knows? But I liked it. I liked that warmth because it added to how it felt, right? Like,
yes,
and that was the idea, is how did it feel that day taking those pictures? So I felt like I needed it to feel less clear and a little bit more jumbled and a little bit more like what it feels like inside of me. And those transparencies just layered on top of each other did the trick. So I don't know. Like I said, I think when you look at it, it kind of looks like a mess. But if you kind of spend some time with it, you feel more than see what it is. But I also really love the picture, so I'm going to post that reel.
Yeah, the whole reel is so good. And it doesn't look like a mess. The wild thing is it looks like a single shot.
Yeah. But then there's like a weird line, but then a lot of my pictures have a weird line. Like, you know what I mean? So it makes sense.
I love it so much. So well done. Well done, Cami Turpin.
The only thing I really couldn't do that I wanted to do actually was a double exposure. I can't do that without looking at my camera. You know what I mean? I don't know the exact number of.
Right. Yeah. See my Nikon FE, there's just a knob.
Right.
So
I could do it with a different,
yeah.
but on my Rebel, which I was shooting, because I feel like with my Rebel, I know exactly what to do better than any of my other cameras because I shoot it so much.
Yeah.
So I knew exactly how to do all the stops, but I couldn't get to a double exposure. So this also fixed that because then I was like, after the fact, making double exposures. And Amy and you and I talked about maybe possibly even stacking my negatives, which also would have been really cool, but I didn't get my negatives back in time from the lab. So this was like my answer to that, like fix your problem.
It's the mother of invention, and there you go.
So it worked out anyway. So that's how it happened. And I'm pleased with how it turned out, but I also love each individual shot. I think that is amazing, but just the fact that I had to, not just in shooting, but also in kind of editing and putting it together, totally let go. And to me, again, that's the best and most beautiful things in life are when I'm able to completely let go. I have a hard time with that. Imagine I feel a little bit like a control freak lately. But I do have to let go and trust sometimes. Oh, look, both of us had to let go and trust, right?
So as I was processing this week's theme, one of the words that kept coming to mind is risk, and how to embrace these best and most beautiful things in the world really requires risk. And it can feel a lot, safer. Even if it's not, it feels safer to kind of stick with the status quo and stay closed off, which is why I shot some closed off. But it is a risk, and it takes vulnerability. And that's why, like, reaching my arm up and just come grab me and pull me up. Like, I'm still looking down because I'm hesitant, but it's like, I want to take that risk. And that's the only way that you can get to fly with those beautiful, best and most beautiful things, is by taking the risk. And so, and I would say, here you shot blindly and I shot blind doubles. As I say, copyright Cami Turpin, but she claimed that.
I don't know. I don't know where that came from.
I don't know. I attribute that phrase to you. And it is a risk, because I didn't know. I could have ended up with birds and smack dab in the middle of my face for every shot. Like, I just didn't know. So yeah, it's all about risk and letting go of control. But that's the only way you can find the best and most beautiful things in the world. That's where they are. They're in the land of risk.
And we should mention that sometimes the risk, I mean, you might have had the birds over your face and we would have laughed at those and then moved on. A lot of people will call that a fail and say, I'm never doing doubles again. I always end up with birds in my face. Right. But the thing about opening yourself up in life or in art or in whatever is that sometimes you end up with a bird on your face.
Or last week, a face in my crotch.
No, sometimes it happens. I mean, it doesn't always work out. No. No matter what. Sometimes we get our hearts broken. Yeah. But it's worth it for the times when we get to those beautiful things. Yeah. Those best moments, and the times where we do find love and friendship and those beautiful things. It's worth the times that our hearts have been broken. So yes, it's hard. It's hard to get the fails, especially when it's, I don't know. I was just telling someone, I think every time I shoot, for this bee theme, it costs me between $40 and $60. It's actually extremely expensive. One time I used 3 packs of Polaroids. So it was specialty Polaroid. But in this one, I shot a whole roll of Lomo, which costs the film and the developing. And then I used almost a whole pack of Polaroids doing my lab. So that is not cheap. That's $40 pretty much. So it's worth it to me to risk all of that just to get something that feels right. I do decide to invest. It's not easy. I don't just have money to burn. I know it seems like it the way I'm just printing Polaroids, but I don't actually have money to burn, but it's worth it to me to risk that. I decided a while ago to let myself have those resources for this project, I guess. So besides just like actual risk of feeling like you're failing, there is actual physical risk sometimes. Yeah. But it's worth it. I think it's worth it to me.
A lot of times you can't laugh at the bird in the face until you get to the success. Like in the moment, it can feel very, I'm just using that as, a representative of all failures.
All
It
fails.
can feel so defeating, but then you
Mhm.
get to the success and it's like those things get redeemed, because you wouldn't have gotten to the success if you hadn't gotten through the bird in the face step. And then you can look back and laugh and be
Yeah.
grateful that you persevered even when the bird hit you in the face. And
Exactly.
so it doesn't mean it's always easy, but there is hope that one day you'll be able to look back and you'll say it was worth it.
Mhm. I think so. We have to hang on to that. So this is the thing, I guess, that I'm feeling like today, especially with my post with the sugar,
Yeah.
is that things, just kind of keep coming. Sometimes I just feel like they're dumping on you all the time, like over and over. And it feels like there's no end. The thing for me right now, and I know you've felt this, is that some trials, some of our struggles feel like there is never going to be an end. But it's not, there's no end to creativity either, right? Like we already talked about in this talk, there's the summit and then that's a new beginning. So yes, maybe there is no end to this specific trial that I'm dealing with. There might not be. But I can take each individual like bright spot, and then that's a new beginning. So it's important to me to work through this stuff in creativity so that I remember that it works in life too. Because it's important. Or else why wake up every morning? Why load your film? Why do any of it unless there's going to be those bright spots,
It's
So
true.
sorry to get super.
No, I love that. This is exactly what I'm here for, because art imitates life, and it can serve as beautiful reminders in the midst of the junk.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is, both of us, I know, have found art to be very therapeutic in that way. And just kind of a way to process emotions and process experiences and process life stages. And so for that, like, how can you give up on something that has gifted you so many beautiful things?
Right.
Thank you for
That's what
sharing.
we're here for.
I know that I'm not the only one who resonated very deeply with that. So
good.
All right, next prompt is out of the blue. And I just figured out today during my workout, because that's usually where in my mind, is churning. I finally figured it out. So
yay! I've been wondering, because I'm like, Amy has not said a single thing to me about her out of the blue.
Because I had no idea. And then it came to me out of the blue. Just kidding. No, I actually well, and my high school math teacher was a big believer in starting and attempting a problem just right away. Like saying, okay, I probably won't be able to get this problem, but I'm just gonna start it. And he say, like, your subconscious will work on it. And all of a sudden you'll be in the shower and the solution will hit you. So maybe, out of the blue and things. Anyway, I wasn't even trying to tie this into out of the blue, and yet it does tie. But this is why, as soon as we're done, I'm like, and kind of before then, I'm trying to mull, but I don't necessarily give it a ton of cognizant thought until I'm like, okay, now I have to shoot. But it's amazing how your mind will just kind of process it for you. It'll do the work for you as long as you look at it and you kind of start it. You don't have to have the answer. Your brain will do that subconscious work. So, and it did, and it hit me out of the blue. So,
well, and I'm hoping when I develop my role that I took for it, I mean, I have some Polaroids, but there is a whole roll. I shot a whole roll of Portrait 800, which, as we know, is very expensive. So
stinking expensive.
But I'm going to self-develop it. I don't know what it'll look like, but anyway, the point is I'm hoping that out of the blue, the one will show me. But what I've been noticing this week is that since I shot, I've been thinking about the theme differently. Well, I kind of had an inkling of it while I was shooting, but we'll talk about it more later. But I just am thinking about the word blue differently many times. That's all I'm saying. And how to get out of the blue.
Oh my God, my brain was going, okay.
We're in sync.
Talked about this. All right, I can't wait. We'll have to talk off camera, and then
preview.
suspense. Yeah, we're gonna leave you all in just total suspense. So, well, thank you for joining me yet again for Conversations with Cami. It was a delight.
Yes, always a pleasure, Amy. Thank you.
Well, we'll see you soon.
Okay, bye.